Welcome, drifters. Tonight's story is about the mortals who were saved, guided, or spared by the god with winged sandals, Hermes. From stolen lives to stolen moments, each of them owes him a favor. If you truly enjoy these stories, then take a few seconds to like and subscribe, because it is all the motivation I need to keep going. So close your eyes, get comfortable, and let the god of hidden roads lead you into sleep. Hermes, the swift-footed god of cleverness and travel, watched over many lives with silent care, often stepping into the mortal world not with thunder or fire, but with subtle gifts and unexpected blessings. To the childless king of Hyria, a man named Hyrieus, who lived in Boeotia and had grown old without an heir, Hermes came one day alongside Zeus and Poseidon. Disguised and unannounced, the gods were welcomed warmly into the king's home. With no questions asked, and with the kind of generous hospitality only the truly noble possess, Hyrieus gave them food, rest, and warmth. Touched by his kindness, the gods chose to reward him in a strange but divine way, creating a child from their very own divine essence. Mixing their urine into the earth, they brought forth a son, Orion, who would grow into a mighty hunter, shaped not by womb but by the strange alchemy of godhood and kindness. In another part of the world, Hermes intervened when Nephele, a cloud nymph, feared for her children's lives. Their father, Athamas, had turned cruel and intended to sacrifice them. To rescue them, Hermes gave Nephele a ram with golden fleece, capable of flight, which carried the children Phrixus and Helle far from danger. Though the journey ended in tragedy for one, it saved the other, and Phrixus would later be guided once more by Hermes, returned to Greece, not as a fugitive, but to clear his name before the very father who had once sought his death. Hermes also lent his cunning to Odysseus, the crafty king of Ithaca, when the hero faced the enchantress Circe. With Hermes' divine aid, Odysseus resisted her magic and turned a dangerous enemy into a helpful ally. In the hills of Lycia, two humble peasants, Philemon and Baucis, lived a simple life. When the gods once again walked among mortals in disguise, only this old couple welcomed them into their modest home. Touched once more by kindness offered freely, Hermes and Zeus rewarded the couple not with riches, but with a deeper blessing. Their small home became a temple, and at life's end, they were turned into trees, forever entwined in love. Hermes also helped Priam, the old king of Troy, when his grief threatened to undo him. After his son, Hector, had fallen, Priam dared the impossible, entering the enemy's camp to retrieve his son's body from the warrior who had slain him. Hermes, unseen by mortal eyes, guided the frail old man through danger, stepping with silence between Greek guards and fearsome warriors, until Priam stood before Achilles, not as a king, but as a father begging for his child. And so it was that Hermes, not just god of trade and speech, became a protector of human sorrow and loyalty. He was also the guide of souls, leading them through the veil that separates life from death. When the mighty Heracles descended to the underworld to fetch the three-headed beast Kerberos, it was Hermes who led him safely through the dark paths and returned him to the light. When Laodamea, mourning her lost husband Protesilaos, could not find peace, it was Hermes who, at the command of Zeus, brought his ghost up from the depths of the underworld so that she could see him once more and bid farewell. Beyond acts of kindness and passage, Hermes also stirred the hearts of artists and thinkers, bestowing his cleverness and grace to those who called upon him. The storyteller Aesop, famous for his animal tales, was said to have gained his wisdom after praying to Hermes for inspiration. The god answered by lighting his mind with a brilliance that would echo across generations. Amphion, king of Thebes, was given a lyre by Hermes and taught to play so beautifully that stones moved and walls rose at his command, his music a bridge between man and matter. Daphnis, a boy from the fields of Sicily, learned bucolic poetry under Hermes' gentle guidance, his songs echoing the rustle of leaves and lowing of cattle, immortalizing the rural beauty of the world. At the wedding of Cadmos, another Theban king, Hermes stood among the gods and gifted either a scepter or lyre as a symbol of his presence and blessing on the union. Orpheus, the greatest bard of them all, received the first lyre Hermes ever crafted. Made from a tortoise shell, it carried the magic of beginnings, and in Orpheus's hands, it became a tool for moving gods and even softening the heart of death. But Hermes was not just a giver to those who prayed or ruled. He was father and teacher as well. Aphrodite, his son, was granted perfect memory. Across many lifetimes, through many forms, he remembered everything, each past life, each death, and each birth. He walked the earth as a living archive of time, a soul that forgot nothing. Autolycus, another son, was made the greatest of thieves, able to cloak the things he stole in illusions, fooling all who sought to trace him. Hermes did not punish his son's craftiness but enhanced it, making him a reflection of the god's own cunning. And then there was Hermaphroditos, born of divine blood, Ida. When the naiad Salmaches clung to him and prayed never to be separated, the gods answered by fusing them together, creating a being of both male and female, balanced and strange. In each tale, whether grand or small, Hermes moved not with brute force, but through cleverness, guidance, music, and mercy. He crossed realms of gods and men, life and death, speech and silence, lifting the lowly, guiding the brave, and rewarding the kind, not with gold, but with transformations, freedoms, and legacies that would never fade. Salmaches stood beside the spring that bore her name, where once a strange and unforgettable union had taken place. The one who had merged with her body had cried out in confusion and sorrow, and in the aftermath of this strange event, the voice of the one who had once been two rose in prayer. They turned their plea to the heavens, calling upon Hermes and Aphrodite, the gods who had given them life and shaped their being. In answer, Hermes and Aphrodite bestowed a lasting gift upon the waters of Salmaches' spring. From that moment forward, anyone who entered its pool would feel their strength altered, their nature softened, their essence changed. The spring became known not just for its beauty, but for its strange power to blend and shift what it touched. Elsewhere, far from the stillness of that pool, Myrtilos rode in the chariot of a king. He was the charioteer of Oinomaus, ruler of Pisa in Elis, and he helped the hero Pelops win the king's daughter and his kingdom. But betrayal followed quickly after victory, and Pelops, who had accepted his help, turned on Myrtilos and cast him down. As he fell, Myrtilos cried out, summoning the vengeance of his divine father. He called on Hermes with his last breath, begging him to curse the bloodline of the man who had betrayed him. Hermes heard and answered, sending a shadow over that family's future. But even in death, Myrtilos was not forgotten, for Hermes placed him in the sky among the stars, creating the constellation of the charioteer, so that he would ride forever across the heavens. In the land of Phocis, there once lived a man named Daedalion, a ruler whose daughter Chione caught the eye of both Hermes and Apollon. The gods loved her, and she bore sons by both of them, whom Daedalion raised with care and pride. But tragedy came when Artemis, in one swift act, took the life of his daughter. The weight of grief was more than Daedalian could bear. Unable to carry the pain, he climbed a high cliff and hurled himself into the air. Hermes and Apollon, watching from above, felt sorrow at his fall, and in pity they transformed him before he struck the ground. His body became feathers, his arms became wings, and he rose again as a hawk, a bird sacred to the gods who had once loved his child. In the southern lands of Lake Daimonia, two twin brothers grew close to Hermes. They were known for their bravery and skill, and in return for their friendship, Hermes gifted them two magical horses. These steeds were swift beyond imagining, born not of mortal breeding, but of divine will, and with them the twins became legends in their own right. Still further to the south, in Mycenae, a hero named Perseus began a journey that would carry him to the ends of the world. His task was to slay the Gorgon, the fearsome Medusa, whose gaze could turn a man to stone. But he was not alone. Guided by Hermes and Athena, he first found the daughters of Phorcys, the Graeae, who shared one eye among them. They told him where to find the Nymphae, who kept treasures belonging to the gods. From them, he received winged sandals to fly, a sack called a kibasis to carry what he could not touch, and the helmet of Hades to become invisible. Hermes also gave him a sickle made of adamant, a blade harder than any metal, sharp enough to sever the unseverable. With these gifts, Perseus flew across land and sea, reaching the edge of the world where Medusa slept among her sisters. With the sickle, he struck, and her head fell without ever looking into her eyes. He placed it in the kibasis and fled before her sisters could wake. Later, as he returned, he came to a place where a sea monster threatened a chained girl. From the sky, with the wind beneath his sandals, Perseus flew down and defeated the creature, freeing the girl from her doom. When his long task was finished, Perseus did not keep what had been lent. He returned the sandals, the kibasis, and the helmet to Hermes, and gave the Gorgon's head to Athena. Hermes then returned the divine objects to the Nymphae who had guarded them. The deeds of Perseus were remembered in many places. In Seriphus, he was known as the hero who had flown on Hermes' sandals. According to stories from ancient tellers, Hermes had loved the hero, guiding him with great care. He gave him not only sandals, but a cap with wings and a helmet that made the wearer unseen. The Greeks called it the helmet of Hades, though the wise knew it was not taken from the underworld itself, but made in its likeness. After his victories, Perseus washed his hands and built altars to the gods who had aided him. He raised 3 turf altars, one to Hermes, one to Zeus, and one to Athena, and upon them he sacrificed in gratitude. To Hermes he gave the cow, honoring the god of guidance and swift flight, the god who had lent his speed and cunning to a mortal in need. Each of these stories, stitched together across lands and centuries, reveals not just a god who watches, but one who walks among mortals. Hermes moved not only with speed but with purpose. He answered cries of pain, requests for vengeance, calls for help and prayers for love. He gave wings to heroes, horses to brothers, memories to sons, and songs to poets. Whether in the shifting water of a spring, the fiery curse of a dying man, the cry of a hawk, the gallop of divine steeds, or the hush of invisible footsteps flying over waves, his presence was always near, unseen, but shaping fate. The hands of Hermes were light, but they left marks that would last for all time. Minerva received a calf, Hermes a sacrifice of gratitude, and to the high king of the sky, a bull was offered in reverence, and so these honors were given in proper form. swift as breath, Perseus, bearing wings not of his own, but gifted by Hermes, flew high, close to the clouds, the heavens beneath his feet as he moved with grace across the air. The wings crafted by Hermes and bound to his feet carried him faster than any creature on land or sea. He was a wayfarer not of roads or rivers, but of the sky itself, carried onward by shoes that made no sound, each step a hush in the upper world. His course was steady, his mission set, and the air bent to his movement. All this was possible through the favor of the wing-footed god, who gave not just speed, but protection and direction to those he blessed. But even before Perseus and his flight, the god had given his favor in older days, in lands of quieter fame, in places where the sky did not burn with stories, but where the soil bore legends of its own. In a part of central Greece known as Athamantia, there lived a man named Hyrieus, a king who was kind and generous. One day, strangers came to his door, 3 travelers unknown, though their presence felt heavy with dignity and quiet power. These were no ordinary men, but Zeus, Poseidon, and Hermes in disguise, wandering the mortal world to test the hearts of men. Hyrieus, unaware of who they truly were, welcomed them without hesitation. He offered them food, drink, rest, and hospitality, without question or demand, honoring the sacred duties of a host. Touched by his kindness, the 3 gods revealed their nature not through light or thunder, but through quiet reward. They promised to grant him anything he wished, and Hyrieus, whose heart had longed not for riches or glory, asked simply for a child, not a wife, not a kingdom's extension, but a son to call his own. The gods listened and agreed. Then, in a ritual both strange and divine, Hermes brought forth the hide of the bull that Hyrieus had earlier sacrificed to honor them. Together, the 3 gods urinated into the hide, mixing their divine essence in a way unknown to men. They folded the hide and buried it in the earth. Time passed. The soil, now seeded with godly presence, grew something unnatural, something never seen before. After 10 months, from that patch of ground, a child emerged, tall, strong, untouched by womb or fatherhood in the human sense. Hyrieus named him Urion, for the manner of his birth, but later the name softened with time and the tongue of storytellers, and he came to be known as Orion. He was large, towering, and beautiful, and though he came from no mortal mother, he was still beloved and raised as a true son. In some tellings, the land where he was born took its name from Hyrieus, becoming Hyria, remembered not for conquest or war, but for kindness that brought the gods to rest and the soil to give life to a giant. Other stories placed Hyrieus in Thebes or on the island of Chios, but wherever he lived, the tale remained the same. 3 gods in disguise, 1 kind man, an ox hide soaked in divine power, and a child born of the ground and sky. One poet, ashamed to speak of the act too plainly, hinted at the oddity, calling the place Sodom and the act unspeakable, but still acknowledging the miracle that followed. The boy born from the hide grew quickly, his strength unmatched, his charm natural, his story destined for the stars. He became known not just as a son of a kind man, but as a being of 3 fathers, crafted not through love or battle, but through generosity answered with divine creation. Another poet wrote of this land as a place of joy for the gods, naming it after Hyrieus, whose open hand brought about the birth of a child, not bound by mortal limits. And when the child rose from the ground, it was as if the earth itself had become a midwife, delivering not a boy from a woman, but a being shaped by will and favor. Orion, the child who came from no marriage bed, whose birth had no mother, rose as a symbol of divine reward. A tale carved not in scrolls alone but in the stars where his shape still burns in the night sky. And Hermes, among the three, stood always closest, guiding, gifting, and shaping the path of this strange-born boy. In each of these moments, whether giving wings to a hero or life to the childless, Hermes acted not through might or law, but through grace, cleverness, and quiet favor, leaving behind no monuments but stories that would never fade. The oracle had spoken with heavy words, foretelling that the famine afflicting the land would only come to an end if a sacrifice was made. Specifically, if Phrixus, the son of Athamas, were offered to Zeus upon the altar. Pressured by the growing desperation of the people around him, and unable to resist the force of the collective will, Athamas, though the father of the boy, allowed the preparations to be made. Phrixus, still young, was seized and brought forth to be laid upon the altar of sacrifice, the flames flickering as though in anticipation. But before the final moment could come, Nephele, his mother, appeared. She was not of mortal blood, but born of cloud and sky, and her love for her children was swift and fierce. She swept down and took hold of both Phrixus and his sister, snatching them away before the blade or fire could touch them. To carry them to safety, she entrusted them to a creature unlike any other, a ram with a coat of shining gold, a gift she had once received from Hermes. The golden ram, glowing with divine brilliance, took the children upon its back and leapt into the sky. Across land and sea, over valleys and waves, the ram flew, bearing them far from the place that had turned against them. They soared high above the world, their path a trail of light beneath the heavens, as they journeyed eastward toward the distant kingdom of Colchis, far beyond the edges of the Black Sea. There the ram landed, its duty done, but its story did not end there. At the urging of the ram itself, Phrixus offered the creature as a sacrifice to Zeus, the god of exiles and wanderers, for it was through divine will and divine escape that he had reached this place. On the leafy boughs of an oak tree in Colchis, Phrixus placed the ram's golden fleece, a shimmering relic that would later draw heroes of legend. Near that sacred grove, an altar stood darkened by old smoke, the very place where Phrixus had offered the sacrifice, following the instructions that Hermes had given him when they crossed paths along the journey. Later, Phrixus's son, Argos, would tell the story to the Argonauts, remembering how his father arrived in Aeetes' city on the back of that golden beast, and how that fleece, bright as the sun, was still visible where it had been hung. Phrixus, though he had fled his homeland as a fugitive, was welcomed in Colchis with open arms and kindness. But the story did not close there either, for Hermes, always watching and guiding, would later return Phrixus to his father Athamas, proving to all that the boy had not run out of guilt or crime, but had fled with innocence in his heart. Through Hermes' favor, the truth was restored, and the bond between father and son was made whole again. Far from that journey through the sky, across the land of Lydia nestled in the hills of Phrygia, two other mortals were about to meet the gods in a different way. Among those hills stood two trees, an oak and a lime, wrapped together within a small wall. Nearby stretched a marsh, which in earlier days had been solid land, the kind where homes once stood. Now it had become a place of birds and water, quiet and shifting. To this land, Zeus and Hermes came once, dressed not in their divine forms, but in the humble appearance of mortal travelers. Their wings were folded away, and no sign of their godhood marked them as they walked door to door, seeking shelter. They knocked on 1,000 doors, and were turned away 1,000 times, for no one in that region would offer them a place to rest. Yet in the smallest of all homes, a simple cottage thatched with reeds and straw, they found welcome. There lived an elderly couple, Philemon and Baucis, who had been together since their youth. Their home was poor, their clothes plain, and their lives humble, but their hearts were rich with kindness. They had grown old side by side, finding joy in what little they had and bearing their poverty with peace and quiet pride. They did not see the gods before them, only strangers in need. Without hesitation, they invited them in, offered them food, and served them with hands that had long known the work of simple living. There was no wealth to share, no grand bed or feast, but what they gave freely and with joy. Their table, though meager, became a feast through the presence of the guests. And the gods, touched by this rare act of true hospitality, revealed who they truly were. Philemon and Baucis were afraid, but the gods calmed them and offered them a reward, not of gold or splendor, but of eternal unity. They transformed the old couple's cottage into a grand temple, and when the time came for the couple to pass from the world, they were not taken by sickness or separated by death. Instead, they were turned into trees, the oak and the lime that still stood side by side in the quiet grove, joined forever, their roots entwined as their hearts had been in life. The land around their home changed. Those who had once refused the gods' entry were punished, and the ground became a marsh. But Philemon and Baucis, whose home had been too small to hide greed or pride, were remembered not only in legend, but in the very landscape. And so it was that Hermes, god of travelers, guided both the fleeing and the faithful, lifting children to safety and rewarding elders for kindness. In sky and in soil, in flight and in stillness, his favor moved quietly, but left behind stories that would never fade. Seek no riches nor fine halls, but only hearts that welcome and hands that give. In that little house, where master and servant were the same two people, where to obey and to command was all held between the old man and his wife. The god stooped and stepped through the low doorway, finding rest not in riches but in simplicity. The man quickly placed a bench before them, worn but clean, and asked them to sit, their limbs weary from their long journey. The woman, full of care, spread a rug over the bench with hurried motions, her movements practiced from years of habit. She turned to the hearth where ashes still whispered of yesterday's flame and, with gentle effort, coaxed it back to life. She laid bark and dry leaves over the old embers, feeding the small flickers until fire rose again. Then she reached above to the rafters where dry wood waited, split and stored for such a day, breaking twigs into a little copper pan, which she set upon the fire. From the garden by the stream, her husband had gathered cabbage, still fresh with water, and she trimmed it with care. He, meanwhile, took down a piece of smoke-cured pork, dark with age, and stored above on the blackened beam, using a forked stick. From that long-preserved meat, he sliced a small piece and added it to the pot to boil. As they worked, they talked with their guests, letting time pass without notice, the quiet conversation smoothing away any awkwardness. A beechwood bowl, hanging by a curved handle on a peg, was taken down and filled with warm water so their guests could bathe their tired feet, and they offered it with gentleness and dignity, as if tending to kings. When it came time to rest, they laid out a mattress of river sedge, soft from the stream, and placed it on a couch made of willow branches. It was humble in design, but strong, and on it they spread their finest cloths, old and simple, brought out only on days of worship. And though time had faded the color and the edges were frayed. They offered them as if they were robes of silk. The gods reclined there, resting not on luxury, but on love. The woman, wrapped in her apron, moved with care and arranged the table, her hands trembling with age but steady with purpose. One leg of the table was shorter than the others, and so they placed a crock beneath it to make it level. She wiped it clean with a bunch of green mint, its sharp scent filling the air. Upon the table she laid olives, both black and green, fruits born of Athena's tree, alongside jars of cherry plums preserved in wine lees from autumns past. Endive and radishes were placed with care, creamy cheese and eggs warmed in the ashes, each dish served in honest earthenware. They brought out a bowl for wine, its surface chased to shine like silver, and beechwood cups with interiors sealed in yellow wax. The meal was not grand, but it was whole, and no long delay stood between courses. The fire brought warmth, and the scent of food filled the air. A second course followed, the fruits of their land and labor, nuts, figs, wrinkled dates, sweet grapes from the vine, fragrant apples, and golden plums arranged in woven baskets. At the center of it all stood a honeycomb, pale and gleaming, its surface glistening like the morning dew. And more than the food, more than the wine, it was the care behind each offering, the love behind each gesture, and the light in their eyes that made the feast feel full. Their zeal was plain to see. No show, no slowness, only a steady, glowing kindness on their faces that made the small cottage feel rich with peace. As the guests drank, something strange began to happen. They noticed that no matter how many times the wine bowl was emptied, it filled again. The wine, red and dark, rose up by itself, flowing freely into the bowl as if from an unseen spring. This miracle, quiet yet undeniable, stirred a chill of reverence through the hosts. Fear and awe entered their hearts, and Baucis and Philemon raised their hands to the heavens in prayer, their voices trembling as they asked for forgiveness, ashamed that their meal had not been grand enough for beings so divine. Then understanding dawned. There was a goose in their care, old and grey, a loyal guardian of their little home. It watched the threshold and patrolled the yard, and though it was no majestic beast, it had long stood as the protector of their life's small boundary. They decided they would offer this last companion to their guests, to show their gratitude in the only way they could. But the goose, sensing what was to come, flapped its wings and ran. It dodged their old hands and worn steps, escaping again and again as they chased it through the yard. Around and around it went, until at last it fled not into a corner, but to the feet of the gods themselves, seeking sanctuary in their presence. And there it stopped. The gods raised their hands and spoke. They told the couple to stop. The chase was over. The sacrifice was not needed. They revealed themselves, their true forms no longer hidden behind simple cloaks or dust-covered feet. The old man and the old woman looked upon them, and though fear trembled through them, it was swallowed by awe. These were no travellers, these were immortals, and yet they had sat on a willow couch. They had eaten cabbage and pork. They had drunk from beechwood cups, and they had been served not in gold, but in sincerity. The gods needed nothing more. The gods had seen enough. It began with words spoken in kindness, but carried by divine command, as the gods revealed themselves and said that the wickedness of the land would no longer go unpunished. The countless houses that had turned away strangers would pay for their cruelty, but for the two who had opened their doors with humble hearts, mercy would be given. They were told to leave their home behind and follow the gods up into the mountains. The old man and the old woman did not hesitate, though their limbs were worn with age. Leaning on their walking sticks and steadying each other with each step, they began the slow climb. The path was steep, the distance long, but they pressed forward. As they neared the top of the slope, just a bowshot away from the summit, they turned and looked down at the world they had left behind. What they saw made them stop. The land below, once filled with homes and fields, had become a vast, silent swamp. The flood had come swiftly and spared nothing. All the houses were gone, washed away by divine force. All, that is, except for one. Their own cottage stood untouched, dry and shining amid the waters. But even as they watched, that small old home began to change before their eyes. The crooked rafters grew straight and strong, now supported by marble columns. The thatched roof shimmered and shifted until it became golden, glowing with divine light. The low door rose and widened, becoming a grand entrance, and where once the floor was packed earth, now lay polished stone. Carved doors appeared, rich in detail and pattern, and their tiny cottage had become a temple. The gods turned to them with gentleness and asked what reward they would like most. The old man glanced at his wife, and she at him, and they understood each other without needing many words. He spoke for them both, and said that they wished only to serve as priests of the temple, caretakers of the sacred place that had once been their home. And he added softly that since they had spent every year of their lives in harmony, they hoped that the same hour might take them both when the time came, so that neither would have to see the other's grave or lay the other in the earth. The gods, moved by the honesty and devotion in this wish, granted it without question. So the couple remained in the temple, serving quietly for many years. Time passed, and age continued to weigh on them, yet they were never alone, always tending the altar together, sweeping the steps, lighting the lamps, offering prayers for strangers, and remembering the gods who had walked once through their door. And then one day, as they stood before the temple's threshold and spoke gently of the old days, a change began to come. The old man, speaking of their youth, saw his wife's skin begin to shimmer green and tiny leaves spring from her arms. She looked at him, startled, only to see that bark had begun to grow along his legs. They reached for each other, and as they did, their fingers became branches. The bark crept higher, covering chest and face, until they could speak no longer. But just before their mouths were hidden by wood, they said goodbye, their last words shared together. And then the transformation was complete. Where they once stood now grew two trees, side by side, springing from the same root, their trunks twined as their lives had been. The people of the nearby land still show the trees with quiet pride, pointing to them as a sign of love and honor. Wreaths are hung on their branches and offerings laid beneath. Travelers pass and pause, and the tale is told again and again, not with grandeur but with reverence. Those who served the gods so well were in the end honored by the gods themselves, and so worship is returned to those who gave it freely. Far from that sacred place, in the deepest shadows of the world below, another story unfolded, where favor was shown in a place not of peace, but of fear. There was once a task given to a great hero, sent by a king who hoped the challenge would prove too much. The hero was told to descend into the underworld and bring back the hound that guarded the gates, Kerberos, the fearsome beast that no man dared face. The path led through gloom and silence, a land of lost souls and forgotten names. But the hero did not go alone. Hermes, god of travelers and guides of souls, walked with him. With Hermes by his side, the way was opened, the shadows parted, and the living man entered the land of the dead. Athena also lent her gleaming gaze to his cause, but it was Hermes who guided the steps, and the hero, with strength and calm, brought the beast from the depths and returned to the world of light, not in triumph but in silence, the labor complete because he was not forsaken. Even before this great journey, when the hero was still young and learning the path he would walk, the gods had armed him with gifts. From Hermes he received a sword, sharp and steady, ready for trials ahead. From others came bow and arrows, armor of gold, and a robe of protection. But it was the sword from Hermes that marked him with cunning and speed. Later, when he again descended into the underworld as part of another labor, the dead scattered before him. Souls fled from his presence, afraid of the living among the dead. Only two did not flee, a warrior and a woman shaped like a monster. The hero, startled, reached for his sword, mistaking the silent figure for a threat. But she was already gone, not alive, but only a memory in the shadows. Still, the sword was ready, Hermes' gift gleaming even in that place where light could not reach. It was a token of favor, a reminder that even in the darkest depths, the hero was not alone. Hermes, silent and swift, had guided his steps before and would do so again, from temple stairs to the gates of the dead, from golden roofs to blackened halls, the path always marked by favor freely given and faith quietly kept. He walked alone through the thick woods, the trees crowding close, their branches dark and twisted, the air still and heavy with silence, broken only by the faint sounds of distant birds and the rustle of leaves underfoot. He had left behind the ship and the safety of the shore, climbing upward into a strange land that none of his crew had known, a place whispered of in fear and caution. His steps were sure, though his heart carried the weight of worry. Somewhere ahead lay the house of the enchantress, a figure of danger and beauty whose name carried dread. As he neared the dwelling hidden in those glades, something happened. Suddenly, in that hushed and haunted place, he was not alone. A figure appeared before him, swift and radiant, with golden wand in hand. It was Hermes, the divine messenger, the one who moved unseen and unheard, yet whose words changed the paths of kings. In that moment, he did not look like a god towering in glory, but like a young man in the early bloom of youth. Just as the first signs of manhood touched his face, he reached out, took the wanderer's hand, and with quiet urgency warned him of the danger ahead. Hermes spoke clearly, saying that those who had come before him, the ones who had walked the same path, had fallen into the trap. His companions, once men of strength and voice, now grunted behind the walls of the enchantress's home, turned into beasts and held in pens like cattle. The house he was about to enter was not merely a home, but a trap dressed in finery. The enchantress would welcome him, offer him drink and comfort, but her gifts were laced with spells. Hermes told him plainly that if he went forward unarmed with knowledge, he too would fall like the others, trapped not in chains, but in enchantment. Yet he did not leave him to fate. Hermes had come not just to warn, but to help. He reached down and plucked from the earth a strange herb, its root black as night and its blossom white as milk. It was a plant unlike any other, one that no mortal could gather without harm. But for Hermes, all things were possible. He called it moly, and it held power against spells and deceit. He gave it freely, a divine protection pressed into the hands of a mortal. With the herb in hand, the wanderer was told what to expect and how to act. When he entered the house and was offered drink, the magic would be in the cup, but the moly would guard him from its power. When the enchantress struck him with her wand, expecting to see him collapse or change, he would stand firm. And at that moment, he was to draw his sword, not to strike, but to frighten, to show that he could not be taken like the others. She would step back in fear, but her nature would shift. She would invite him not to fight, but to stay. She would offer her bed and her favor, but Hermes warned him not to accept until she had sworn a binding oath, the great oath of the gods, sealed by the river that even immortals feared to break. Only then would she be harmless. Only then would she release the others and show her true self. These steps were clear, and Hermes gave them with care, guiding him not with force, but with wisdom. Then, as silently as he came, Hermes was gone, vanishing into the woods, his path leading back toward the mountain home of the gods. The wanderer continued alone, holding the moly tightly. He reached the house and found the enchantress waiting. Her beauty was real and her voice soft. She welcomed him, and from a golden goblet she offered him a drink, its surface still and inviting. He drank, but the spell failed to touch him. She raised her wand, expecting to command, but nothing happened. Her words fell empty, commanding him to the sty, but instead he drew his sword. That was the turning point. In that moment, she saw something she did not expect. Not just resistance, but power beyond her reach. And so the spell broke, not with noise or battle, but with silence and steady strength, aided by the god who walks unseen, who guides not with fury, but with lightness of step and firmness of purpose. It was Hermes who turned the path. It was Hermes who changed the end. He moved forward with the sword at his side, hidden until the moment it was needed. And when she struck with her wand and spoke the words meant to turn him into something less than a man, he stood firm and unshaken. He reached for the blade beside his thigh, and in one swift motion drew it and rushed at her, raising the weapon as if to strike her down. She cried out, a sharp cry that filled the room and echoed through the air thick with magic, and she dropped low beneath the blade, sliding away from the edge that had never been meant to touch her. In a moment, she was no longer a goddess standing tall and dangerous, but a woman on her knees, her arms reaching to clasp at his legs, her eyes wide with surprise and fear. She begged him to stop, her voice quick and full of trembling, her words falling over each other in a rush. She asked who he was, where he came from, and how he had resisted what no one else ever had. She told him that no man had ever swallowed her potion and remained unchanged. Her spell had always worked. Until now. And then she understood. He must be the one she had heard about. The man with the far-roaming soul, the one whose name Hermes had once spoken to her, the one the golden-wanded god had said would one day come, sailing from Troy in a fast, dark ship. It was he. There could be no doubt. She dropped her voice low, calming it, and told him to put the sword away. She asked him to lie beside her, to share her bed, and promised that if he did, she would no longer hide anything. In that closeness, she said, trust would grow, and her threats would fall away like shadows in morning light. But it had not been her words that saved him, nor his strength that broke her spell. It had been Hermes who had met him on the wooded path and given him a single white flower, a herb called moly, its root black and its blossom pale as milk. That flower, pulled from the ground by a god's hand, was what shielded him from her tricks. It was rare and perilous for mortals to even touch, but in his hand it had felt like armor. And so when he drank from her cup, the poison in the potion melted away. Others had fallen. His own men turned into beasts, their voices lost, their minds fading. They had been shut away in pens like animals, weeping without words, feeding on husks and crushed grapes and grass like swine. But he remained a man because Hermes had taught him how to walk through danger without being caught by it. Even in later times, when poets told of this tale again and again, they spoke of how those who indulged too much, who lost their discipline, were turned into lions and wolves by her spells, shaped by their own weakness. But he, who listened to the guidance of Hermes, who followed the steps given by the god, walked free. He came to her house, took the cup she offered, added the charm to her drink without her noticing, and when the moment came, showed her the blade instead of a smile. That act, bold and calm, made her understand. He was not alone. The gods themselves had a hand in his steps. She returned his men to their proper form, their limbs stretching out of animal shapes, their voices returning like breath after drowning, their minds slowly clearing. She promised not to harm him, and kept that promise. And through it all, the strength did not come from war or shouting, but from a quiet gift, a white flower pulled from the ground and placed in his hand by Hermes, who had seen what lay ahead and gave him the only thing that would carry him safely through it. In the end, it was not force that broke her spell. It was favor, and favor walked quietly, with golden wand and light steps, and gave what no sword could. It gave protection, it gave escape, it gave the power to stand unbroken when all others had fallen. The root was black, pulled from the earth by divine hands, given as a shield against deceit. And with this in his grasp and the grace of heaven upon his path, he stepped into the halls of the enchantress. She greeted him, not with weapons but with smiles and gentle words, coaxing him toward a cup filled with false sweetness. As he raised it, she moved closer, her wand lifting to touch his hair with the soft stroke that had brought so many to ruin. But before her spell could fall upon him, he pushed her away and drew his sword, its blade flashing in warning. She shrank back in fear, the power she once wielded broken not by strength, but by the quiet favor of the god who had walked with him in the woods. In that moment of stillness, trust was born, not of love or peace, but of caution and balance. They clasped hands, not as strangers, but as those who knew the danger of one another. She led him to her bed, not as a prisoner, but as an equal, and there the bond between them was sealed. Yet he had not come for himself alone. For a gift of that joining, he asked not for gold or safety, but for his companions to be restored to the shape they had lost. She agreed, and they were brought forth. No words were needed to describe what they had suffered. Beasts made of men, minds trapped in animal form, memories faint and fading. She took a strange herb, its scent sharp and its color unknown, and sprinkled them with its juice. She turned her wand around, touching each head with its reversed end, and then spoke words that unspelled what had been spelled, chants that turned back the curse. One by one, the men stood again, their eyes clearing, their voices returning, their hands lifting in wonder. The enchantment was undone, not by battle, but by a promise. And behind that promise stood the God who had made it possible. Later, that same God would be sent once again by the King of the Heavens, tasked with commanding another goddess to let the man go. But in this moment, it was still the island of the enchantress, still the chamber where magic had been shattered, and still the silent work of the one who had shaped paths and broken spells. And just as he had guided through danger, he had once guided the hand of music itself. In a city not yet walled, in a time before stones were laid one upon the next, another man walked with divine favor. He was born of a god, and yet he was not known for strength or war. His path was sound. Hermes gave him a lyre, not simple in form, but crafted with care. Its body shaped from a tortoise shell, its arms curved like horns, its strings stretched tight over boxwood, each piece chosen and placed with perfect design. No ivory adorned it, for the tusks of elephants were still unknown, and what mattered more was balance and tone, not shine. The lyre had black horns like those from leaping goats, sharp and strong, and the tortoise shell, dark and rich with irregular circles and yellow eyes, seemed alive beneath the strings. The strings themselves, fastened at the lower end with knobs and suspended between bridge and crossbar without visible support, hummed with power. When he touched them, sound filled the air, not only with notes, but with force. With that lyre in his hands, he walked through Thebes. At that time, the city had no walls, only open ground and scattered homes. But as he played, the stones moved. Each note pulled them closer, not with hands or hammers, but with harmony. The music shaped the city, lifting one stone atop another, stacking them into towers and lines, until walls stood where once was only earth. And the people saw and believed. His song did what no army could, and those who looked upon him saw not a king in armor, but a man with hair falling loose across his brow, strands tangled with the light beard growing near his ears. His face was not stern, but focused, and the lyre at his side was more powerful than any blade. The gift had come from Hermes, who had first built the lyre with his own hands, shaping it from pieces of the wild world, then offering it to the gods, and finally to this man. And in that passing of sound from one to another, a city was raised, a curse was undone, and the quiet power of the golden wand worked its way again through the world. For those who were lost, Hermes gave the path. For those who were changed, he gave return. For those who were silent, he gave music. And though he moved lightly and often unseen, the shape of his favor was always deep and lasting. Showing a glint of gold, the headband caught the light like morning sun on a still pool, yet it became even more beautiful where it rested upon the brow of the singer, fastened in place by the work of the Graces, whose hands had woven it into something more than a mere ornament. The poets of hidden verses spoke of it as a lovely thing beyond compare, fashioned by divine fingers to match the music it crowned. It fit perfectly with the lyre it accompanied, both of them glowing not only with beauty, but with purpose. Some said that the god who guided travelers and carried words between heaven and earth had gifted both the lyre and the headband to the one who wore them, moved not just by admiration, but by love. And there was also the cloak, the chlamys, draped across the singer's shoulders, shimmering in shifting colors, never staying one shade for long, but flowing like a rainbow. That cloak too might have come from the same divine hand, for the god who ruled over messengers also governed the rainbow, and in its ever-changing light, the cloak carried a piece of the skies. Together, these gifts, the lyre, the headband, the cloak, transformed the singer into more than a man. His song lifted stone and stirred spirit, and the city rose not from labor but from melody. From the favor of one god came the strength, not of battle, but of harmony, and walls stood firm where there had been none, all because of the song. In another land, far from the rising towers of Thebes, a young herdsman wandered through the fields of Sicily. His name was simple, his life quiet, but he held the attention of the god who moves through shadows and open roads. Some whispered that the boy was his son, born of earth and God, while others said only that he was beloved, chosen for his beauty and simplicity. He played his pipes among the flocks, and his music echoed softly through the hills, untouched by ambition, shaped only by peace. In that simple life, divine favor flowed not through gold or glory, but through closeness and care, and the God who watched him did so with a smile. Elsewhere, across the Aegean, another gift was being given. When the hero reached the island of Samothrace, he took part in rites older than memory. There he met the one who would become his bride, and their wedding was unlike any before. It was said to be the first to which the gods themselves came as guests. They did not arrive empty-handed. From the goddess of harvest came the gift of grain, a symbol of life and plenty. From the goddess of wisdom came a robe, a necklace known for its wonder, and a flute that sang with clarity. But from the swift-footed god came a lyre, finely made and perfect in sound. And in other tales, it was said he gave a scepter, a sign of rule, fitting for a man who would lead and for a woman who would stand beside him. That wedding, held beneath the watching sky, became a moment of balance between earth and heaven, and every gift carried the weight of meaning. Still further north, in the quiet land of Pieria, another boy grew beneath the gaze of the gods. He was born of a muse and had music in his blood. The lyre, first crafted by the god of roads and trade, made from a shell and string stretched across horn and wood, found its way into the hands of this boy. His name would one day be known by all who sang. The god had made the lyre on Mount Selene, shaped it with care, and given it first to the bright god of light and music. But the instrument passed on again, from teacher to student, until it rested with the one who could make the trees weep and the stones follow. His fingers called forth not just sound but memory, and his voice moved hearts and held silence in its sway. When he died, the lyre did not vanish with him. The gods, remembering the beauty he had drawn from it, raised it to the sky. It now hangs among the stars, a reminder of the harmony born from divine gift and mortal hands. Among those touched by the god's favor was one whose gift was not music or rule, but memory. He was chosen as the herald for a ship of heroes, a man quick in speech and firm in thought. In his hand, he carried the wand of his father, the very same one that guided souls and shaped paths. And with it came a mind that forgot nothing. Every word, every sight, every sound stayed with him, unshaken by time. Even when he crossed the river that no one returns from, even when his soul passed into the mists, where memory fades and names are lost, he remembered. His fate was not to sleep in stillness, but to live again and again, each life holding the memory of the last, every face and every voice kept fresh within his soul. In life and beyond, he remained the one who remembered, a living record carried on the tide of time. This too was a gift, given by the God who walks beside the traveler, who whispers behind the wind, who speaks in quiet places where mortals listen without knowing why. From music to memory, from scepter to herb, his gifts did not roar, but they endured. Where his favor fell, the world shifted, not with fire, but with song, with words, with light footsteps that left behind echoes strong enough to build cities, heal spells, and light the stars. At times he walked among the living, standing beneath the sun and breathing the same air as other men, and at other times he was counted among the dead, a soul drifting below the earth, moving between light and shadow, as if the boundary between the two could never truly hold him. This strange fate was his alone, to exist both in the world above and below, a soul unforgotten, one who remembered all and forgot nothing, never bound entirely to death, nor wholly to life. And while he carried the memory like a flame through each turn of the world, another of the god's favored children carried a different kind of gift, one shaped not by remembrance, but by deception. In the land of Phokis, a man named Autolycus stood apart from all others, his name tied to cleverness and theft, a master of trickery who owed his skill to none other than his father, the winged god. The god had seen his sacrifices, lambs and goats burned in reverence, and in return for the devotion, he gave the man a gift unlike any other. No one could match him in sly oaths or secret thefts. He could steal from the finest herds, slip into any pen, take what he pleased, and leave no trace, because what he took never stayed the same. A white ram would become black, a hornless calf would grow horns, a marked animal would lose its mark. Nothing he touched remained unchanged. No fence could hold his hand, and no eye could catch it. When a man named Sisyphus began to notice his herd shrinking, he grew suspicious, for no other flocks grew like Autolycus did. To trap the thief, he marked the hooves of his animals, carving signs into their flesh that could not be disguised. When Autolycus stole again, he did as he always had, but this time the marks gave him away. Sisyphus followed the prince to the thief's land, found his cattle among the rest, and claimed what was his. Still, it was clear that Autolycus had inherited more than quick fingers. He had taken in the god's talent for reversal, for illusion, for changing the very shape of things with only a glance or a whisper. In stories told long after, poets said he was the son of the winged one, and no trick was beyond him. He could turn white into black, black into white, false into true, and true into false. And in him, the cunning of heaven walked on mortal feet. Far from that land, across sea and time, another child of the god lived not through cleverness, but through transformation of a different kind. Born from the union of the swift-footed god and the goddess of beauty, this child carried both names, a fusion of both bloodlines, and the story of that blending was written into his very body. As a boy, he was whole in form, strong and graceful, but when he dove into a still pool one day, he rose changed. The waters belonged to a nymph who saw him, desired him, and prayed not for his love, but for his body to join with hers so that they would never be parted. The gods heard her prayer, and her wish was granted. His limbs grew soft, his body half shifted, no longer entirely male. His voice rose with a softer pitch. And where he had entered the water alone, he now stood as a being of two halves, joined in one frame. In shock, he raised his hands and called out to the heavens, his voice trembling and strange. He begged his parents, one god of swiftness, one goddess of love, to make the pool reflect his fate, to carry the same power that had changed him. Let any man who bathed in its water emerge as he had, half woman, body weakened, strength dissolved in softness. And they heard him, moved not by vengeance but by love for their strange and broken son. They agreed. The water was touched, its shine made impure, and from that day on, it bore the mark of his transformation. What had happened once would happen again, and the still surface became a mirror of what could not be undone. But not all gifts from the god brought sorrow. In the city of Pisa, there lived a man named Myrtilus, who served as the charioteer for a great king. He was skilled with the reins and wheels, trusted to guide the horses of royalty. When a hero came to claim the king's daughter and his throne, Myrtilus chose to help him, perhaps swayed by promise, perhaps by his own reasons. He altered the chariot, changing what would be a race into something else entirely, and because of this, the hero won. But after victory came betrayal. Myrtilus was cast aside, thrown from trust and from life. As he fell, he cried out not to the world, but to his father, calling upon the god of travelers and messages to avenge him. His cry was not ignored. The god answered, and the house of the betrayer was cursed. Discord entered their blood, passing down through generations, never resting. And in that one breath before death, Myrtilus left behind not silence, but a storm, called forth by the voice of a son whose father had the power to listen across all distance. These children, one of memory, one of theft, one of transformation, and one of vengeance, were all touched by the same hand. Some bore the mark in their talent, some in their bodies, some in the echo of their final breath. And through them all, the god's favor moved, quiet but lasting, a thread that wound through lives and out across time, weaving a pattern not of glory but of sharpness, of secrets, of things seen and unseen. Where he gave, things changed, sometimes for beauty, sometimes for pain, but always with the weight of something deeper than chance. In every trick, in every song, in every cry for justice, he was there, not as thunder or fire, but as the whisper that changed the course of things forever. Sons fought and blood was spilled, and from that sorrow grew a curse, one that stretched beyond a single life and into generations. The death of one brought wrath from a father who was no ordinary man, but a god whose favor turned cold. Myrtilus, the charioteer betrayed and killed after helping a hero win both race and bride, had called upon his divine parent with his last breath. And Hermes, hearing his son's cry as he fell, did not let the plea go unanswered. From that moment, the line of Pelops was shadowed. The feud of brothers that followed, the hunger for power, the bitter struggle for the throne of Mycenae, all grew from that first injustice. The curse did not break with time. It passed from father to son, until it became a story not of one crime, but of many. Yet for all the pain left behind, the father still gave honor to the son. Myrtilus was placed among the stars, made immortal not in name alone but in the sky itself. Some said he became the constellation of the charioteer, rising and setting with the heavens, his memory fixed in light. Some named his mother Theobule. Others called her Clytie, but all agreed that his form now guided the night above, not forgotten despite the betrayal that ended him. In another part of the land, two brothers known for their strength and bond were also touched by the god's favor. Competing in a great race, the Dioscuri sought not only speed, but glory, and as they prepared to ride, they received gifts from the gods. Hermes gave them Phlogius and Harpagos, swift and shining horses, born from a divine wind-mare. These were no ordinary creatures, and their hooves struck the earth with fire. Another goddess gave two other horses, Xanthos and Celaros, but the ones gifted by Hermes came from his affection. One of the brothers, Polydeuces, was said to be beloved by the god himself, and in that affection, Hermes offered another gift, Doctor, a Thessalian horse, strong and fast, known in the north. With these steeds, the brothers raced not only for sport but for something more. Their chariots guided by divine speed, their path smoothed by favor that ran deeper than the race. And so their names joined the list of those who moved with God-touched swiftness, who rode not by will alone but by the strength of what had been given. In the hills of Arcadia, far from royal games and tragic bloodlines, a simple shepherd prayed. He had no silver, no ivory, no gift of rare metal to offer. He could not hang gold upon the altar, nor shape a staff of wealth. But what he had, he gave. Aesop, the shepherd known in time for his stories, had only milk from his sheep, a small honeycomb, and a handful of wild herbs, myrtle perhaps, or a few bright petals. He placed them with care before the statue of the god. His prayer was not for riches or fame, but for wisdom. He asked not for temples or power, but for the gift to speak, to understand, to tell. Others came to the same temple and laid their riches before the god, each one hoping their heavy offerings would buy them greatness. When the time came for the gifts to be shared, Hermes, god of eloquence and wisdom, moved among them. To the one who had given the most, he offered the path of the philosopher. To the next, the place of the orator, and so on down the line, each man receiving what fit his gift. When he came to Aesop, the one who had brought only what the land and the flock had allowed, he did not pass him over. Though the honeycomb was small, though the milk was plain, though the offering was quiet, it had been given with thought, with heart, and so the god gave him something different, not a title or a role, but the very thing he had asked for. From that moment, Aesop's tongue moved with stories that reached beyond time. He became not a king or a soldier, but a speaker of truth in simple tales, remembered not for his wealth, but for his wisdom, and that wisdom, given not because of what he owned, but because of what he asked, traced back to the god who had stood beside roads and across skies, hearing every kind of voice, even the quiet ones. In each of these lives, of the betrayed, the heroic, and the humble, the thread of favor moved, unseen but strong. It did not always come with glory. Sometimes it brought a place among stars. Sometimes it brought a horse that never tired. Sometimes it brought only the words that outlasted a lifetime. But whatever it brought, it stayed. Hermes, god of swift paths and clever turns, gave not what was expected, but what was needed. And where he gave, the shape of things changed, not with thunder, but with a step, a whisper, a gift placed gently where it would grow. He said, "You may have the gifts of the stars and study the turns of the heavens, or you may become a master of song, letting your voice rise like wind over the mountain peaks, or you may shape great poems in the style of heroes, speaking of war and glory in the measured steps of epic verse, or you may take up the sharp and biting lines of iambic rhythm, speaking truths that wound." And so he gave these gifts one after another, offering them to those who had brought offerings of silver and gold and ivory and jewels. But though he was wise, so wise that every word carried weight, he did not mean to forget the one who had brought only the milk of his sheep and a honeycomb small enough to fit in the palm. He had not meant to pass over the one who had laid down flowers picked by hand and berries gathered in a pouch. But somehow, in the giving, he had left Aesop behind. Then, in a quiet moment, the god remembered the Horai, those who had raised him high on the peaks of Olympus when he was still in swaddling clothes. He remembered how even then they had whispered stories to him, one of which was about a cow speaking to a man, not with a growl or a moan, but with words. That story, told before he had even learned to walk, had sparked something in him, something that led him to chase after the bright herds of another god, driven by the strange power of tales. And so now, with all the other arts already given, he turned to Aesop and gave him what remained, the art of storytelling through fable, the craft called mythology. It was not the highest seat of poetry, nor the most honored place in the courts of kings, but it was the first thing the god had learned himself. It was born not from gold or warfare, but from listening. He gave it freely, and with it, Aesop shaped stories that would cross borders and centuries, told in simple words, shaped by beasts and birds and trees, each one holding a truth deeper than it seemed. And in this gift, as in all the others, the god did what he had always done. He carried words, for he was the messenger of Zeus, the one trusted with commands and truths that could not be spoken by thunder. When the king of the gods looked down and wished to speak, it was this one he turned to. Again and again, the poets and the sages said it. Hermes was the herald, the one who walked between sky and earth, between divine halls and mortal fields. His feet had wings not for flight alone, but for speed, for silence, for the ability to move through air and shadow without being seen. Homer called him the one who always served as messenger, swift and sure, and Hesiod named him the Glorious One, the herald of the immortals. He was not merely a speaker, but the voice of heaven itself, and with his golden wand he moved unseen, crossing from Olympus to the mortal realm, from cloud to cave, from order to chaos. Others wrote how he had been made Zeus's personal herald, not just once but forever, a role that was his alone. In hymns, his name was chanted as the one whose skill could outwit even Argos, whose 100 eyes could not stop him. He coursed through the sky, unseen but present, always carrying words, commands, truths, and warnings. In Ovid's tales, he himself said it plainly. He was the one who bore his father's messages, who crossed the sky not for glory, but for duty, when the King of Heaven needed something done, something precise, something delicate. It was not thunder he sent, but this sun, this swift one, this quiet force. The same message echoed again and again in the words of poets and storytellers. In Statius, he was the Arcadian, with wings on his feet, and in Nonnus, the son of Maia, sent like a flash from the throne of the sky. And not just from Zeus alone, for even in the stories where other gods stood watching, when a task needed grace and swiftness and exactness, it was he who was sent. Wherever words needed to go, wherever silence needed to be broken without alarm, he was there, carrying not just speech, but intent, weaving through the air like a breeze that speaks. So he gave Aesop not riches, but stories, and he gave the gods not gold, but movement. He lived not in palaces, but in paths. His was the gift of transition, the art of turning one thing into another, beast into word, command into action, message into myth. Whether speaking to kings or whispering to shepherds, whether guiding the dead or cheering the quick, he moved between worlds without needing to stay in one. And as long as there were messages to carry, he would move, not loudly, but surely, always present in the space between silence and sound. He flew on outspread wings, swift and silent, carrying the commands of the sky. When the King of Heaven prepared to take a queen, when the wedding of Zeus and Hera was to be held in all its divine splendor, it was Hermes who was chosen to send the word out. He was not asked to summon only the great gods of Olympus, but also all living things, even the animals of the earth and the mortals who walked under the sky. With his golden wand and winged sandals, he moved quickly through every realm, calling each being by name, inviting them to the sacred gathering. And all obeyed the summons. From mountain and forest, from river and cloud, they came, gods, men, and creatures, all except one. Only Shelon, silent in her pride, refused the invitation. For that, a different story would unfold, one that would end in transformation and punishment. But Hermes' task was done, his message delivered, his wings never slowed by refusal. He was also sent once to retrieve a star. A youth named Phaenon had been made by Prometheus during the shaping of mankind, more beautiful than any other, a figure of light and promise. But Prometheus had not offered him to Zeus as he had the rest. Instead, he kept him back, hidden in secret. Yet Eros, the watcher of hearts, saw all and whispered the truth to Zeus, The king of gods, wanting what was his, sent Hermes to fetch the boy. With his charm and skill, Hermes did not command but persuaded. He spoke gently, and the boy followed. Through air and sky they rose, and when they reached the realm of stars, Venus was placed among them, turned into a light that would never fade, the star of Zeus, shining in the night forever. After the world was flooded, and only two stood where many had lived, when the rain had stopped and the earth lay quiet and wet, Hermes was sent once more. The man who survived, standing alone with his companion, offered sacrifice to the one who holds the thunder. And Zeus, moved by the offering, sent Hermes to ask what he desired. His answer was simple: people, life, not riches or strength, only others to walk the land with him. Hermes gave the instruction, strange but clear. Take stones, throw them over your shoulders. Do not look. And as the stones fell behind, they changed. The ones thrown by the man became men. The ones thrown by the woman became women. From earth and stone, people rose again, not shaped by womb or childhood, but by the will of heaven and the guidance of Hermes, who stood between old world and new, and gave shape where there had been none. And there was the time when he was sent below, down into the shadowed land, past the gates guarded by the dark beast, into the halls where no mortal sound is heard. The daughter of the harvest had been taken, and her mother grieved so deeply that even the crops withered. Zeus sent Hermes to the land of the dead, not with force but with speech. There he brought the girl back to light, for a time, breaking the hold of silence with the gentleness of a voice that carried the will of gods across even the deepest boundary. But not every task brought peace. When the one who had stolen fire stood bound in chains, stretched across the rocks by the sea, punished by the heavens for giving light to men, Hermes came not as a rescuer, but as an enforcer. Zeus demanded to know the secret. The prophecy whispered that a marriage would one day destroy his power, that the bride he feared would bring ruin, and Hermes was sent to ask the one who knew. He came with hard words, ordered to bring back a clear answer, not riddles. But the chained one refused. He had seen gods fall before, and he said he would see it again. Hermes warned him, said that his silence had led him to this torment, that it would bring more pain. But the bound figure would not yield. Hermes, still and proud, did not beg. He turned and flew back, his message carried, his duty done, though no answer had been gained. In each task, whether summoning to a wedding, calling a star to the sky, guiding new life from stone, lifting a daughter from death, or demanding secrets from a chained rebel, Hermes moved as the voice of Zeus. His wings did not falter, his wand did not waver. He carried messages that shaped the fate of gods and men alike. His role was not to decide, but to move, between worlds, between moments, always carrying the voice of heaven where it must be heard. And when he flew, the sky opened to him, the earth listened, and even the dead could not block his path. He did not strike with thunder or roar with fire. He did not rule with a throne or burn with wrath. But no one ignored him. No place was beyond him. No will of Zeus was complete without his flight. Where his wings spread, stories turned, and the silence between gods and men was filled with a voice that spoke, not for himself, but for the one who watched from the throne above. Word once it has been spoken. And so it was that the winged messenger stood firm in his command, delivering the decree of the Sky Lord with unwavering tone and relentless certainty. He did not come with kindness, nor cloak his words in sympathy, for the one he faced was no gentle soul, no obedient servant, but a defiant figure bound in agony to the crag, the rebel who had gifted fire to mortals and who now suffered the full wrath of the heavens. And yet, even with the storm of warning, the threats of thunder and the torment of the eagle that would come daily to devour the liver from his still living body, the chained one did not yield. He listened not with fear, but with fire still burning in his heart, unbroken, unmoved, and resolute in silence. He had seen the high ones fall, those who once ruled and were cast out, and he knew that the current sovereign too would face his destined fall, foretold by fate and sealed by the knowledge he held. And that knowledge, like a buried flame, he would not give away, not for pain, not for pleading, not for threats. He did not flinch at the prophecy of the storm to come, did not tremble at the image of a cliff shattered by divine thunder, or of being buried under jagged stone, still bound, still conscious. The image of a winged beast, born of Zeus's wrath, tearing him apart every day only to begin again the next, did not soften his resolve, for he knew that only when another, some god, some being, willingly chose to take his place and descend into the shadows of the underworld, would his release come. And this truth he held tight, not as a secret to be traded, but as a torch of defiance in the face of an unjust rule. Hermes, swift and silver-tongued, could not pierce that wall of stubborn pride. His words flowed like a river against a stone, persistent yet futile, clear yet unheard. He warned that the mouth of the Skyfather never lied, that what was spoken would be done. He painted the full horror that awaited, time endless, pain unrelenting, isolation complete. But the chained one, fierce even in ruin, refused to bow. He would not kneel, would not cry, would not beg. He mocked the messenger, calling him a child, unwise and unworthy, an errand runner dressed in divine pride. He hurled back words like blades, sharp and cold, scornful of the threats that came from above. He would not, he said, become like a frightened woman, lifting his hands in supplication, seeking release. No softness lived in his soul, only iron. He would endure. He had chosen this course long before it began. The punishment was expected. The pain a path already walked in the mind. Even the vision of eternity chained beneath the sky, body torn again and again by a savage bird of prey, did not change his choice. The messenger's patience thinned. He had no more arguments to offer. He had said all there was to say. He saw now that persuasion would not work, that reason would not move this spirit carved from defiance. He compared him to a wild colt, freshly harnessed, biting the bit and jerking against the reins, fierce not from wisdom but from stubbornness. The struggle, he said, came from pride, not strength, and in the end, the one who refuses wisdom suffers most of all. And still, the chained one gave nothing. He would not say who the bride was, the union that would one day bring the King of Heaven low. He would not utter the name, not while bound, not while scorched by flame, not while eaten by eagle. Hermes declared the end of his task, for he had tried. The sentence stood. The mountain would break. The bonds would not be loosened but buried deep. The eagle would feast. The long years would pass in pain. But even then, the messenger hinted, not all was without hope. For the wheel of fate turned, and somewhere, someday, another would appear. A god brave enough to suffer in another's place, to trade the daylight of the heavens for the shadow of the depths. Only then would the chains fall. Only then would the voice of prophecy be needed no more. And until then, the chained one would remain, not broken, but waiting, enduring, and watching as the reign of gods unfolded, certain in his secret, certain in the fall that must come. The sky would roar, the eagle would scream, the rocks would hold tight, but in the silence of torment, he would remain unbent, a flame in stone, a warning in flesh, and a defiance that not even thunder could silence. Let no hesitation live in your heart, for the will of heaven now flows through this house like a clear river, and you, wise in your years and keeper of harmony in your halls, must allow this divine thread to weave through your daughter's life. So he spoke, light-footed and certain, with the glint of the sky still in his eyes, and the breath of command in every word. The room, once still in quiet contemplation, stirred with the weight of his message, and though the messenger was veiled in mortal form, his presence bore the unmistakable mark of the skies, the way a breeze sometimes carries the scent of rain long before a cloud is seen. He had come not just with a request, but with the tide of fate itself, as if each word had been stitched into the fabric of destiny. The daughter, Harmonia, had been chosen, not merely as bride, but as a bond between mortal and divine, a living thread meant to restore balance after the chaos that had shaken the world, when monsters rose and gods stumbled. He reminded them that the one she would join in marriage was no common man, but the Saviour, who through music that charmed even the wildest beasts and untamed storms, had calmed the fury of the great beast that once sought to unseat the skies themselves. He spoke of how this man, a stranger and a wanderer, had stood firm when Olympus had nearly fallen, how his strength and spirit had soothed the very breath of destruction. The messenger's voice, soft and sure, echoed with this memory, a tale not of conquest but of balance restored, of song triumphing where swords had failed. The man he spoke of had lifted the day, had brought back the light, and now the gods offered a gift in return, an everlasting union with the daughter of harmony. The messenger did not demand, for the divine do not plead, but his tone bore the gentle weight of certainty. He told her to give her daughter, not with gold exchanged or dowry arranged, but with open hands and trust, for the bridegroom was already bound to the heavens through deed and favour, and in that moment, the house that had known quiet contemplation became the chamber where fate moved forward, not with thunder, but with footsteps as light as wind. The mother, hearing this message, would feel not command but invitation, not burden but honour, and though tradition might have asked for offerings, for negotiation, here was a higher calling. This was not a wedding of arrangement, but of accord, not of politics, but of cosmic thanks. And so the messenger, having spoken the will of the Father of gods, having made clear the merit of the man and the meaning of the match, lingered not, for his feet were swift and his mission complete. The silence he left behind was not emptiness, but fullness, the hush that follows revelation. His wings, though unseen, stirred the air with their passage, and even the doorkeeper, unaware of the visit, would later feel that something great had brushed past him like a breeze of fate. And in that quiet space, the household began to shift, not with clamour, but with calm, understanding that what had just passed was no ordinary proposal, but a thread woven from the looms of Olympus. The gods, in their own way, had come not to claim, but to offer, and through their herald they had shown trust, memory, and gratitude. A marriage, yes, but also a seal, a pact of harmony between worlds. The daughter, whose name already bore the sign of peace, would become the bond through which the divine thanked the mortal, and as the gods above watched, this act would echo not with ceremony, but with meaning, the kind that binds skies to earth and hearts to stars. For the message was clear and the messenger swift, and though his feet touched stone, his words touched eternity. Funeral was among the many divine tasks carried out by the swift-footed messenger. When the hero of the war fell at last and his body lay still, the gods did not let the world forget him. The mighty needed a send-off worthy of their name, and so the skies were stirred. At the command of the king of all gods, the one who ruled from the stormy heights, Hermes was sent yet again. His task this time was not to carry a scepter or deliver a marriage proposal, but to summon the very forces of nature, the winds themselves, for the burning of the fallen warrior. Hermes moved like a streak across the heavens, his feet tracing silent lines between the clouds, his eyes seeking out the hidden caves and resting places of the winds. In his light step, there was both purpose and honor, for he knew that this duty was not ordinary. It was the final right of a soul who had shaken the fields of battle with every stride. The north wind, the west wind, the south and the east, each one tucked away in secret corners of the world, were beckoned by him, not with words but with presence. His arrival was enough. His command understood without sound, for he spoke the language of sky and storm, a language the winds themselves knew well. With a nod from the winged god, they stirred, rising from slumber, swirling through canyons and forests, over peaks and across the sea, until they gathered as one. They came to the funeral pyre with power and silence, whirling around the wood that had been set for the warrior. There the fire was lit, not by mortal hand alone, but by divine breath, the wind wrapping the flames in its arms, lifting them higher, letting the fire grow not in rage, but in reverence. The flames flickered in colors not seen by ordinary eyes, hints of gold, silver, and deep crimson, dancing as if aware that they were devouring the shell of greatness. Hermes did not speak. He did not need to. His very nearness was blessing enough, and the wind obeyed, stoking the fire just so, never too wild, never too weak, ensuring the body of the hero turned to ash as the gods intended. All around, the silence of the world watched, as though every tree, every stone, every bird had paused to witness this rite. The winds hummed a tune, not a melody one could hum, but a presence in the air, a vibration that passed through the bones of the earth. When the flames had done their work and the air smelled of burnt glory and old sorrow, Hermes turned once more to the sky. He did not linger. He was the herald, the guide, never the one who stayed behind. He had summoned the winds, honored the fallen, and now the task was complete. The ashes would be gathered by others, but the fire, that sacred fire, had been a work of the heavens. And in the air, long after the flames had died, the scent of the winds remained, as did the echo of Hermes's flight, a quiet reminder that the gods do not forget those who serve them well, nor do they let the winds blow freely, unless with purpose. So the messenger, ever swift, ever dutiful, vanished into the heights once again, while the world below remembered the man who was burned by the breath of the gods. He laced his shimmering sandals on his feet, those golden, immortal sandals that bore him over the seas and over the boundless lands, swift as the rushing winds. Then he took up his wand, that lovely staff with which he lulls to sleep or wakens those who slumber, that tool of peace and power known throughout the heavens. With it in hand, he leapt forth from the heights of Olympus, and like a bird diving from a crag, he cut through the thick air. First, he skimmed across the crests of ocean waves, so close the spray nearly kissed his ankles, yet the water never slowed his flight. The world beneath passed in streaks of color, dark sea, white foam, green isles, distant capes, until at last the lonely island of Ogygia came into view, ringed by its lush woods and encircled by soft, never-ending mists. There stood the cave of the nymph, carved by nature and draped with vines, surrounded by a forest of cedar and cypress, alive with birdsong and fragrance. He did not hesitate. He passed into the deep cleft cave where she dwelled, and the light around him dimmed only slightly, for wherever the Radiant One walked, brightness came with him. He found her there alone, weaving with a golden shuttle and singing a low tune, while the air hummed with strange stillness, for this was a place set apart even from the gaze of gods. She saw him and understood, even before his words left his lips, that he had not come of his own will. He relayed the message plainly, his voice clear and firm, as always when carrying the will of the Father of gods. The decree could not be challenged, and she knew it. Her face showed sorrow, for she had kept the man as a guest, as company, as something more than mortal. But even her beauty and magic could not bend the ruling of Zeus. Odysseus must go, and go he would, alone by raft, with nothing but the sea and the sky between him and his hope. Hermes did not linger. He did not stay for tears or pleas, for he was only the voice, the command, never the judge. He stepped back into the open world, the winds welcoming him as a brother, the trees rustling not in farewell, but in reverence. His sandals touched sea and sky again, and like an arrow he vanished from her sight. Back toward Olympus he flew, unseen by men, unknown to most, his work done, his role fulfilled. Below him, the mortal stirred from his long stillness, not yet knowing that the path to his home was being cleared by divine will. The cave would open, the raft would rise, and though storms would follow and tears would fall, the command had been given, the god had spoken, and the journey had begun. The Radiant One returned to the heights, to wait for the next call, the next word, the next task that would send him again across the breadth of the world. Who fought for 9 long years beneath the walls of Troy, a man who has wandered far across land and sea, whose soul longs only for the smoke rising from his own hearthstone, though he lies now in a distant land, a prisoner to longing and memory. Zeus commands that you release him at once, that you no longer hold him by force, for it is not his fate to live forever away from his home, nor to linger always in your sacred cave, but to sail forth upon the open sea, to brave its winds and monsters, and after many hardships, reach at last the land of the Phaeacians, who shall give him safe conduct home. This is the will of the high-throned Zeus, and I, his messenger, speak only what I was sent to say. So the Radiant One, having delivered the command of the King of Gods, leaned back in the chair of polished wood, while the nymph, silent and deep in thought, gazed toward the ground, her brow shadowed by unspoken sorrow. But no defiance stirred in her breast, for none of the deathless dares resist the decree of the son of Kronos. Slowly she rose, her robes brushing the cavern's floor like ripples on a calm shore, and she walked toward the edge of the cave, where vines hung heavy with fruit, and birds called sweetly from the forest beyond. The air was thick with fragrance, cedar, juniper, and the warm scent of blossoms stirred by the sea breeze, and the whole grove seemed to wait with held breath as she stepped out into the light. There, down by the shore where the white foam curled over the wet sand, sat the man she had held close, hunched beside the waves, gazing far toward the western horizon. His clothes were worn thin, his skin burned by the sun and salt, and his eyes hollow with longing. Each day he had come to this spot, seated on the same flat stone, staring out over the water, his heart beating with memories of a home so distant he could not tell whether it lived still in the world, or only in his dreams. The trees behind him bore fruit, the waters beside him shimmered with fish, and the hands of a goddess had offered him comfort. Yet nothing filled the emptiness within him but the thought of return. The nymph watched him a moment longer, her face calm and proud, yet marked by the ache of parting. Then she turned back into the cave, where Hermes still sat in silence, and with a slight nod, she acknowledged the task before her. There would be no plea, no protest, only the quiet acceptance of the will that governed all things, mortal and divine. Hermes, knowing his mission complete, stood once more, his golden sandals gleaming beneath him. With a movement light as the breeze that curled the edge of a sail, he stepped past the vines and out into the grove, where the sunlight played across the leaves. He did not look back, for the moment was done, and the future already summoned him onward. The wings on his feet caught the wind, the rod of sleep and waking gleamed in his hand, and in an instant he was gone, rising like morning mist into the high air, his form vanishing against the blue sky. And so the Radiant One returned to Olympus, his task carried out as perfectly as the sun crossing the heavens. Behind him, on that far-off island, preparations began. The goddess, moved though she was, gave no sign of her sorrow, but went about her work with grace. She led the man from the rocks to the sheltered part of the island, where great trees stood tall and strong, and bade him gather timber. She showed him the best trunks, guided his hand as he shaped them, and with her own skill taught him how to fit them tight, to drive the pegs and lash the planks, until at last a raft took form beneath their hands, sturdy, broad, and worthy of the sea. She brought him tools and cloth for sails, and provisions in baskets woven from palm. She filled skins with fresh water and sealed jars of dark wine. Each step was done with care, each act a farewell in silence. And the man, knowing that his way was open, did not weep nor hesitate, for though he bore respect for the one who had sheltered him, the pull of home was stronger than words. At last, as dawn spread her fingers of light across the sky, the raft stood ready. The winds, called by the gods, stirred gently from the west, and the waves seemed to part before him like a path laid by fate. He stepped aboard, wrapped in a cloak she had given, and grasped the steering oar. She stood at the water's edge, her eyes like the sea at twilight, deep, endless, and quiet, and raised one hand. He did not speak. The raft moved away, guided by breeze and heart, and soon the island shrank behind him. Only the gulls cried out above, circling high, as if echoing the sorrow and the hope now mingled on the wind. And above them all, unseen but always present, the swift-footed god passed over the world, bearing with him the memory of another mission completed. Another thread moved in the great pattern that binds gods, men, and destiny into one. Through the high air, gliding over clouds and mountain peaks, the golden wings on his sandals beating fast and silent as breath itself, swift as thought, precise as command. In his hand, he held the sheet Venus had given him, inscribed with the name of the one being whom the goddess now longed to seize, marked with every detail needed for mortal and immortal eyes alike to know her. As he descended, the wind seemed to quiet around him in reverence, and the very trees bowed their tips to the path of the Radiant One. His golden staff gleamed beside him, not used to lull sleep or stir dreams this time, but to mark the authority of the gods upon the world below. When his feet touched the ground, there was no sound, for Hermes, swift as air and light, passed unnoticed through city and village, forest and shore, wherever people might dwell or wander. And there he began to proclaim the decree of heaven, not with anger, not with threat, but with the clear and ringing voice that could not be denied. He held the sheep before him and spoke aloud the reward promised by Venus for the return of her lost maid, Psyche, and with careful speech he described her beauty, her eyes, the way her garments fluttered like flame when she moved, the delicate shape of her face, and all the signs that would make her known to any who looked. No one who heard could mistake his meaning. They paused in their steps, turned their eyes toward the voice, and though some may have forgotten the words, none forgot the tone that shimmered like gold across the air. Through fields and markets, temples and shadowed caves, he spread the word, not tiring, not pausing, always with that same otherworldly calm, as if even in pursuit of justice, he was only ever fulfilling a thread spun long ago by the will of heaven. The proclamation spread fast by word of mouth and dream and divine whisper, reaching corners where no man had walked and heights where only eagles flew. Those who knew of Psyche, or thought they did, stirred in worry or wonder. Some hid themselves deeper in groves and caves, afraid of being mistaken. Others whispered tales of a girl whose beauty had once drawn the envy of a goddess, who had once been swept away by forces unknown, and now was hunted by the same hand that had once adored her. But Hermes did not linger to hear these tales. His task was to speak, to deliver, to set in motion the wheels of fate that would carry the girl toward her next trial or salvation. And as he went, the world seemed to listen. Streams carried his voice in their bubbling. Trees murmured the description with their rustling leaves. Even the birds echoed fragments of the name he proclaimed, as if all of nature itself had been conscripted into the service of Venus. High above, the stars still burned in their place, unmoved and eternal. But below, on the earth where men loved and lost, the name of Psyche now passed from ear to ear like a secret too urgent to be kept. Yet in all this movement and sound, there was still no sign of the girl herself, as if the very power that sought her had also taught her to hide from the eyes of the world. Hermes, ever obedient, ever precise, did not question the outcome. His work was to carry out the will of those above, not to alter it or delay. And so, once the proclamation had been made in every place where ears might hear, he turned again to the sky. The wind took him quickly, joyless and swift, and he rose like a shimmer of dawn above the hills, his form soon lost among the clouds. Behind him, the world lay different than before, not in form, but in feeling. For now every heart beat with the sense that something divine had passed close, that the gods had spoken, and that the thread of one girl's fate had been pulled tighter toward its inevitable end. The goddess, waiting in her halls, knew that her herald had done his task. She needed no report to know it, for the air itself carried back to her the stir of his journey, and her own heart, heavy with both wrath and longing, told her that the hunt had begun anew. Yet the girl remained hidden. The girl with her soft name and trembling breath, whose love had once touched the world of gods and brought pain and passion alike to immortal hearts, was still beyond the reach of justice or revenge. But the wheels were turning, and in the heavens and on the earth, none who had heard the proclamation would be free of its weight. The name was in the wind now, in the minds of those who might speak it aloud to the wrong ears, in the dreams of those who might see a vision and know it to be true. And the one who had spoken it, the radiant God, swift messenger of sky and wisdom, had done all that was required of him. His flight had ended, but the path he left behind would ripple forward through every soul it had touched, leading all at last to the moment that must come. Ask him to grant them better fortune. For long they had suffered from hunger and hardship, and they hoped that through divine favor their lives might be made easier. So, as the tale goes, they chose one among them to serve as their messenger, a noble beast, swift and sure-footed, clever of tongue and faithful in purpose. And this dog, carrying their plea, made his way to the heights of Olympus where the gods dwell. But fearing that the road was long and the journey uncertain, the dog, as he went, buried the offerings and gifts that his kind had sent along, hiding them in the earth for safekeeping, intending to retrieve them after his mission was complete. When he finally came to the halls of Zeus, he presented the petition of the dogs with skill and grace, requesting the favor of the great god, and all the while keeping secret the buried tokens meant for tribute. But Zeus, who sees all and knows even the thoughts behind thoughts, did not let the deception pass unnoticed. He heard the dog's request, but with stern wisdom, he sent no answer, no blessing, no favor, only silence, letting the dog return with nothing but the consequences of his own deceit. And so, it was said that this is why dogs, to this very day, when they find a place where another has buried something, will dig at the earth and sniff and scratch, for they are always searching for what was hidden and lost in that first errand gone awry, always hoping to uncover what once was denied because of dishonesty. Thus, the tale stands as a warning and a memory, and in that moment, the messenger became part of a fable that lingered in the minds of men and beasts alike, for no journey to the gods can end well when trust is buried beneath the soil. And though Hermes himself was not the one who carried the dog's plea, his role as the god of messages and travelers, the one who walked between the mortal and the divine, lingered in the shape of every story where words were sent across distance. His essence echoed even in this old fable, reminding all who heard it that the delivery of a message is not only in the speed or sound of words, but in the honesty with which it is carried. For even when messengers are mortal, their mission touches the divine. And as Hermes moved through the skies or across the lands, golden staff in hand and winged sandals on his feet, each story told of him bore a thread of this lesson. That trust between gods and mortals was a thread not to be knotted or twisted by lies, but one to be carried straight and true, lest the road itself grow dark and the message fall unheard. So it was then, and so it remains. Judgment on these little creatures without a second thought. And thus the man fell silent, realizing the weight of what he had done, and how his words against the divine mirrored the cruelty he had just inflicted on beings smaller and weaker than himself. The tale lingered as a quiet reminder that judgment, whether divine or mortal, often unfolds in ways that humans fail to comprehend until they, too, are part of it. Hermes, as ever, remained the vigilant enforcer of heavenly order, swift in foot and sharp in mind, delivering not only messages but lessons wrapped in consequence. From the careless feet of those who stomped ants in frustration to the pleas of frogs who begged for rule and were met with punishment. Hermes moved between realms with his golden staff, weighing the meaning behind every call and every complaint. He dragged the dogs who forgot their purpose, who were sent as messengers but found themselves distracted by dung and scraps, pulled not by duty but by appetite, forcing him to haul them into heaven just to complete their errand. And he listened to the frogs, who once sang with joy but soon craved control, only to cry out once their wish turned into horror. When they could no longer endure the snake they had been given, it was Hermes who bore their desperate request back to the heavens, carrying the cries of regret and pleading into the ears of the one who had heard them first. In another moment, it was he who carried the burden of human sin, etched not in flame or stone, but written down on humble shards of pottery, each holding the weight of a misdeed, a crime, a moment of cruelty or greed or betrayal. And these shards, stacked high in a great box, waited for the eye of the King of Gods to pass over them, one by one. Some sins rose to the surface quickly and faced the fire of consequence without delay, while others waited in silence, unseen and untouched, yet no less certain in their fate. It was Hermes who managed that box, the keeper of transgressions not yet judged, the silent steward of time and justice. Then there was the tale of man and woman, shaped by Zeus and delivered to earth by Hermes, who was told to show them the art of survival. Earth herself refused at first, unwilling to give freely of her roots and fruits, resistant to the intrusion of mortals scratching at her skin. But when Hermes insisted, invoking the word of Zeus, she relented, not with grace, but with warning. She allowed them to dig, but with every bite pulled from the ground, she promised they would also pull sorrow. And so, the first food came with the first labor, and behind every harvest, tears would follow. Finally, on the shore where a ship had sunk and lives had been lost, one man dared to speak aloud what many think in silence, that the gods are unjust, that one guilty soul should not doom many. But he did so as he himself crushed dozens of ants beneath his heel, his pain at one bite fueling destruction. Hermes, quick and sudden, appeared not with wrath, but with truth. His staff touched the man not in fury, but in clarity, showing him that he was no different. What seemed unfair from the gods was mirrored in his own hands. And through all these tales, from fable to fable, the presence of Hermes was constant, not just as a messenger, but as a guide, a judge, a reminder that actions ripple beyond their moment. He was the god who moved not only through sky and sea, but through the fine spaces between choices and consequences. Whether writing sins on shards, dragging dogs through clouds, or whispering truth through myth, he stood as the quiet force who made sure the message was never lost. For in every story where someone forgets the cost of their desire or the echo of their deeds, it is Hermes who brings the reckoning, neither cruel nor kind, but fair, and always watching. From the brazen jar where he had been imprisoned by the Aphrodite giants, who had dared to challenge the gods themselves. Trapped and humiliated, the war god languished in silence, but it was Hermes who came with swift purpose, his steps silent and sure, descending unseen through the gloom of the world below. With nimble skill, he broke the bonds that held Ares, stealing him back from disgrace and lifting him again into the light of the heavens, just as he had once recovered the stolen sinews of the Sky King from the monstrous Typhoeus, sinews wrapped and hidden deep in the earth. He now moved through danger and shadow to restore what had been taken. Always it was Hermes who acted where others paused, who obeyed not just orders, but the very rhythm of divine necessity. He was the one chosen when punishment was required, and so it was he who carried out the chaining of the firebringer to the cliffs of the Caucasus. When the secret of flame was brought from heaven and gifted to mortal hands, it was Hermes who, at the command of the thunder wielder, descended upon the defiant one, bound him with unyielding iron, and fastened him to stone. And again, when the treacherous Ixion dared reach toward the queen of the gods, it was Hermes who hurled him down into the realm of shadows and lashed him to the eternal wheel that spun without mercy. His presence was the mark of divine law, for where Hermes appeared, No rebellion could linger unpunished. When the many-eyed watcher was set to guard a sacred captive, it was Hermes who came with silent footsteps and quiet cunning. He watched the guardian's gaze shift and flicker, waiting for the right breath, the precise moment, and then struck. The 100 eyes closed forever, and the prisoner was freed. And when creatures born of chaos and monstrous hunger roamed wild, devouring those who dared cross their path, it was again Hermes who was sent to strike them down. The giants who reveled in blood and fear met the vengeance of the sky not through fire or storm, but through the silent approach of the golden-messaged one who never missed his mark. He was not merely the voice of the High One, but the hand that moved swiftly and the will that never wavered. Whether through word or force, it was Hermes who made sure the order of the heavens was never undone. As a herder too, he served the same cause, not with force, but with subtlety. When the king of the gods, consumed with longing, looked upon the one who had become the mother of many, he turned to Hermes. There in the hills of Sidon, Hermes appeared not as a god, but as a simple man, a herder with a calm step and an easy whistle, guiding the herd down from the mountains. And among those cattle moved one not born of earth, a bull with a gaze that held the weight of thunder and the strength of storms. Hermes did not question nor resist. He guided, watched, and made way for the plan to unfold, ensuring that not a single step was out of place. Again, when theft was the mission, Hermes walked the path between light and shadow. From Argos he took Io, not by battle, but by distraction and wit, letting her escape the gaze that never slept. From Typhoeus he reclaimed the strength of Zeus, which had been ripped away and hidden deep, and from the giants he retrieved the god of war, held fast in silence. These were not crimes, but corrections, acts of restoration carried out by the one who walked with purpose and spoke not for himself, but for the throne above. He was the enforcer who moved without sound, the guide who never lost his way, the thief who stole not for gain, but for balance. In each tale, from cliff to wheel, from pasture to prison, from sinews to freedom, Hermes was the one who did what no other would, what no other could. His golden sandals left no trail, his staff brought no harm unless it was commanded, and his eyes saw not just the world, but the spaces between, where secrets lived and justice waited. And so, in every role he played, whether chaining, stealing, guiding, punishing, or rescuing, Hermes stood as the agent not just of Zeus, but of order itself. Where chaos threatened, he walked. Where law faltered, he acted. Where silence reigned, he spoke. And in the countless steps of his journey across sky, land, and shadow, his presence was the final answer, the quiet hand of the storm. From the moment he learned of it, he moved swiftly, guided not by his own desire, but by the command that came from above, from the divine will that kept all things in balance. Deep in the shadows of the earth, in a place where sunlight did not reach, and the clang of iron echoed endlessly, the god of war had been taken and imprisoned, locked not by chains of thought or persuasion, but by brazen, unyielding bonds crafted by the hands of giants. The sons of Aloeus, full of strength and pride, had seized the war god in their arrogance, believing they could contain what few dared face. They had chained him tightly, without pause or mercy, in a bronze cauldron so solid and sealed that even his roars and struggles could not escape. There he remained, trapped in silence, held not for days or weeks, but for 3 long months and 10 days, as his power waned and his spirit dimmed beneath the suffocating pressure of metal and humiliation. And none would have known of it, for he lay forgotten in the depths, had it not been for the one who carried messages through the sky and over the sea, the one whose steps never faltered and whose eyes missed nothing. It was not brute force that freed the bound warrior, but speed, precision, and the quiet knowledge passed from the lips of a stepmother who held pity in her heart. And so, in silence and in shadow, the messenger god came, invisible to the proud and the strong, and stole the prisoner from the cauldron, just as the bindings threatened to break his will entirely. No war cry announced this rescue. No battle flared in the darkness. Only movement, fast, sharp, and unseen. And then the chains lay empty, the war god restored to the light. This tale, told in quiet awe, gave rise to whispers, and even among those who held no love for the gods, there was a grudging respect for the one who had done what none could do, but not all saw it with honor. There were others, jealous of the swiftness and power of the guide, who plotted and dreamed of vengeance. One voice, mocking and proud, spoke of revenge, saying the rescuer himself should know the feel of bronze and the bite of chain, that just as he had freed another, he should be locked and bound in turn. Yet such was the way of those who watched from a distance, never understanding the duty that pulled him forward again and again, without thanks and without rest. His service was not yet done, and his path turned next to another mission, one more strange and hidden, guided by the highest will. In the air, clothed in clouds and mystery, he took another passenger, one not bound by chains but by destiny, a woman famed in story, whose beauty had stirred kings and brought war to cities, was taken from her path, not by force, not in pain, but lifted in silence, wrapped in mist, and carried through the skies, far from the gaze of those who thought they knew her. While the world burned and the walls of Troy shook, she remained untouched, set down gently in a far land, guarded not by warriors, but by the honor of one chosen to keep her safe. To the mortals who fought and died, the woman they believed they saw was not her, but only a shape made of cloud, a form woven from illusion and trickery, for the real one had been hidden away at the command of the one who ruled the thunder and sky. The messenger had brought her there, not with grand gestures, but with quiet certainty, ensuring that her truth would remain protected, while a false image stirred the world into madness. And so, in both rescue and disguise, in both freedom and deception, he moved again and again, not for his own gain, but for the balance of all things, following commands no other could fulfill. Whether freeing a god from bronze or hiding a queen in cloud, his presence marked the turning of fate, the unseen shift that altered the course of legends. Where others stood still, he moved. Where others saw only what lay before their eyes, he stepped beyond the veil and acted in ways none could follow. And so his tale stretched on, not as a warrior or a king, but as the one who passed between. Messenger, thief, rescuer, guide, and keeper of the path.